Hiya, welcome back to another video. Thank you for joining me today. As always, I hope you're keeping well. So I'm going to be chatting about reading slumps and the best way to get yourself out of one, the best way to keep one at bay, and basically tips on how to help you read a bit more than you usually would, because I am a habitual slumper. I am someone who goes through months without reading, without picking up a book, without wanting to, being frustrated by the whole experience. I have been there, done that, but I'm finally in a position where I have been able to get myself motivated enough to read every single day and to keep the reading slumps at bay. So if you're someone who's been struggling to read a book for the last couple of months, if you're someone who's getting back to reading after an extensive break from it, I'm talking a couple of years, or if you're someone who is just getting into reading for the first time ever, this is the video for you. But before I get into all my tips and tricks, I just want to let you know that today's video is sponsored by BetterHelp. Now, I'm a firm believer that if something is bothering you in your life and you have the ability to affect change on that problem, you should. You shouldn't be postponing it. You shouldn't say, oh, I'll start next Monday. Oh, I'll start next month. You shouldn't be putting your happiness on hold, and that's why I'm here to tell you all about BetterHelp. BetterHelp are the largest online provider of therapy. Their goal is to make therapy as easily accessible as possible to those who need to avail of it. BetterHelp take the difficulty of finding a therapist out of your hands, which makes the process of getting started so much easier. Finding a therapist that suits your particular needs and also your schedule can be incredibly difficult. And for these reasons, we can get overwhelmed at the very thought of it. But with BetterHelp, you no longer have to wait for the perfect moment. BetterHelp make finding a therapist easy. Just by answering a few questions, they can quickly match you with a therapist, and you can even select a specific criteria based on your own personal views to make sure that you feel 100% comfortable talking with your selected therapist. And if you don't gel well with the first therapist you're matched with, don't worry, because you can change therapists as many times as you need in order to find the right person for you. And the handiest thing is that it's completely remote, so you can speak to your therapist wherever suits you best. Personally, I've been going to therapy on and off for the last 15 years. I have recently decided that it's something that I want to go back to, as I've been on a mission for the last year to drastically improve my mental health after learning my diagnosis. I deal with depression and anxiety issues, and because of that, it clogs up my brain, it stops me from sleeping, it makes me stressed, and it all around generally just negatively affects my day-to-day life. But through doing therapy and learning about the underpinnings of my thinking patterns and my negative emotions, it's really helped me to put a contingency plan in place in order to put up like a little blockade for certain anxiety issues or when I'm starting to notice when my mood is slipping. It's made me recognize and reevaluate where I'm putting my energy. So if therapy has been something that you've been thinking about or it's been on your to-do list for quite some time now, why not try out BetterHelp by using the link in my description box below or by visiting www.betterhelp.com/devilship. Whatever happens in life, I hope it works out for you, and thank you so much to BetterHelp for sponsoring this video. So if you're someone who's been struggling to read over the last while, or you're struggling to get motivated to read, I just want to let you think about this for a moment. We read thousands of words a day, from text messages, emails, online articles, you name it. We are reading thousands and thousands of words a day, and that's without even trying. That's without even really thinking about it. So firstly, just think about that. And also, as someone who is a terrible self-starter, I'm a terrible self-motivator, I am someone who wishes that I could permanently be in the middle of reading a book that I'm enjoying. That would be my version of heaven, to be perfectly honest, because I hate getting started on new books. And that's the thing, is that getting started can often be the hardest part. Social media has drastically impacted our level of concentration to the point where it's difficult to concentrate for more than 10 seconds. How often do you just mindlessly scroll through the apps on your phone? You know, you're not even really taking in what you're seeing. So first and foremost, if you're someone who's on your phone a lot, like myself, like all of us can fall into the pitfall of thinking that we're just going to check for messages, and then suddenly it's 45 minutes later and we have been doing nothing but scrolling and looking at TikToks and looking at Instagram and learned absolutely nothing of any value over those 45 minutes. You may be someone who needs to think about taking a potential digital detox. And I know that sounds kind of sort of scary, because we always want to keep on top of world events. We always want to keep on top of what our friends are doing. but sometimes you gotta put the phone down, and that's where it starts. My next question to you is whether you can pinpoint where your reading slump is actually coming from. Is it because you've just been out of the habit for so long it's difficult to get back into it? Is it because the last couple of books that you read really underwhelmed you? You know, knowing the kind of core reason of why we can't get back into reading is kind of important to how we can overcome that aspect. Have a think about what it is that has been putting you off reading, what it is that's holding you back. At the end of the day, you need to change a pattern of behavior. My next question to you is, what is it that you love about reading? What is it that you feel that you're specifically missing by not reading at the moment? Thinking about this question requires a little bit of self-motivation, because is it something that you miss the accomplishment of reading? You miss the accomplishment of reading certain types of books, chunkers, what have you? Or are you someone who misses the downtime, the quiet time that you have to yourself while reading? I have to say, I very much value that downtime, and I think that's probably one of my favorite aspects about reading, is that I know that that specific time is my time to enjoy, and that no one can take that away from me. No one needs anything from me in that moment, and it is just glorious. Like, it is just a nice little peace of mind, to be perfectly honest. Something else that I'd like you to think about is practicing mindfulness. Mindfulness before you start reading. And I know that might seem like a lot in order to just sit down and read a book, but a lot of the time when we are distracted within our lives, when we have a lot of things going on, when we're trying to spin a lot of plates, it can spill over into our personal life, our time for ourselves. You could be someone who sits down to read a page of a book, and by the end of it, you don't know what has happened on that specific page to those specific characters, because at a certain point, your mind wandered off and you started worrying about stuff that you have going on in your life. And practicing a little bit of mindfulness can help ease those kind of distractions that can happen when you're actually trying to read, because there's nothing more frustrating when you're trying to read and you find yourself having to read the same sentence over and over and over again because your mind just keeps wandering off. And another thing that can drastically impact our level of concentration is the environment that we're in. Are you in a house that has a lot of noise? Are there noisy neighbors? Are you someone who just can't relax because of the environment that you're in? You often hear people even say, untidy room, untidy mind. Is your space cluttered? Do you feel overwhelmed being in the particular area that you are? And is there something that you can do to fix that? When it comes to noise pollution, obviously there's not a lot of stuff that we can do to fix that sort of thing. But even putting on headphones in order to block out certain noises, listening to music, there are some contingencies you can put in place in order to help you focus and help you concentrate. I want to follow that up with my first tip, which is try to make your environment as comfortable as possible for yourself when you sit down to read. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to do a deep clean on your room or sitting room from head to toe and hang up fairy lights and try to set an ambience and just go completely like bookstagrammer over the top with it. A lot of us don't have the accessibility to sit in a cabin in the woods in comfy clothes with a hot beverage on a rainy day. You know, a lot of these things aren't actually attainable for most people, and we don't have the luxury to do so. But you can turn your space into a little comforting area for yourself. And I'm just talking small creature comforts, you know. Is it having a kind of tidier space? Is it having a hot beverage that makes you feel comforted? Is it having on certain clothing or certain textiles, a certain blanket or certain pillows propped up behind you? I am a huge creature of comfort. I very much enjoy the feeling of being comfortable, and I want to feel that more within my life, in different areas of my life. And unfortunately, it isn't always possible. A lot of the time we can have outside things that we don't control, that we can't turn off, you know, especially if you're someone who struggles with mental health issues. I, for one, am that person, obviously. Sometimes you can't just turn off your brain and make it do what it is that you want it to do. And it's incredibly unfortunate. The main aspect is to not take it out on yourself, not to get frustrated with yourself. the time will come, your time will come. You will achieve everything. And sometimes you just need to give yourself a little bit of a pep talk. And that still leans into the mindfulness that I was talking about. Sometimes it's just the really small things in life that we take for granted that can just affect our mood and not even be aware of it. So think about that. Think about what makes you comfortable. How can you make your reading environment a little bit more comfortable to you? All you can do is make your own sort of reading routine. And that is my next tip. Make yourself a reading routine, a reading ritual that suits your specific lifestyle. You might be someone who has to be at work at a 9-to-5 job. Where is it in the day that you can fit in a bit of reading? Is it on your lunch break? Would you like to get up a little bit earlier? I know a lot of people are like, no, I don't want to get up earlier to just read. Sometimes that works for people if you're an early bird. A reading routine in the evening when you've gotten all the things that you needed to do that day and you can finally just take a little bit of time for yourself and sit down and enjoy it. Making yourself a reading routine is unfortunately the foundation of being a reader. And if you don't have this one particular thing, it is going to be very difficult for you to stay consistent with your reading. Now, you could have a reading routine where you read on certain days. It doesn't have to be an everyday thing because that doesn't suit everyone. That doesn't suit everybody's schedule. There is no perfect reading routine. There is only your reading routine. If you don't set aside the time to read, then you are simply just not going to read. You're not going to get into the habit of reading more frequently. I feel like a lot of people get hung up on the fact that you should be reading every day. And if you want to read a certain amount of books a year, you need to read this amount of pages a day to try to keep on track of that. Honestly, if you're someone who's just trying to read one book because you haven't read a book in years, none of that stuff's important. Read on your time, but the thing is, you have to make the time to read. Getting started and staying consistent are the two most difficult things when it comes to getting back into the habit of reading. And I have to say that if you are trying to emulate things that you see online, certain people's routines, it's not always going to work out for you. You know the amount of time that you can set aside a week to read. You know the days, you know what is going on in your life. You have to remember that if you're comparing yourself to what you see online, a lot of that is performative. A lot of that isn't genuine. There's a lot of Westworld timelines going on with people claiming to have read a certain amount of books in a certain amount of time. I say take all that sort of thing with a grain of salt. You shouldn't hold yourself to super high standards of what you think a reader should be reading every day. Go at it at your own pace and don't let it be something that irritates you or gets you frustrated, because reading should not be a frustrating situation. Unless you're just reading a bad book that's poorly written, that is incredibly frustrating. That's the only sort of frustration you should feel. My next tip would be to avoid bad habits when it comes to reading. Now, you might be thinking, what bad habits? What bad habits could you possibly have? Well, I mean, if you're someone who does your reading at nighttime, sitting in bed, are you someone who finds that reading makes you drowsy? A lot of the time, reading can be a great sleeping aid, but it isn't necessarily the most productive time to be reading when you are trying to get back into the habit, when you are trying to read more. If it's going to make you sleepy after a couple of pages, that isn't the routine for you. The thing that we need to remember is that our brains find association to be a very powerful thing. And this is something that I will talk about further on in the video that you can utilize to your own advantage. My next tip would be to make reading more engaging for yourself. So this is specifically targeted to someone who is struggling with their concentration. You can always dip into listening to audiobooks for a while in order to get you back into the habit of not only setting the time aside for yourself to read, but also to just get you motivated to read again. You can always listen to the audiobook and read along within the book at the same time. There's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. You are helping yourself build that habit, and you are making that sort of muscle memory of oh, this is something that's relaxing, so this is something that's good. You could also make reading more engaging for yourself by annotating. Now, you can go full-blown annotating stickers, underlining, highlighting, all that sort of thing. Or you could just simply write out some quotes that you like in a little notebook, or write yourself little summaries of each chapter. That's especially for someone who may be struggling to remember what they've read. Even talking to other people about what you're reading, talking someone else through something that you're doing is the best way to remember it. Because that's something I used in college a lot, where I'd be explaining how something would work, and in turn I'd be listening to myself say it so I would remember it. And these might be people that don't read, they have no interest in what it is you're actually saying, but because you're hearing yourself say it, you're kind of motivating yourself and keeping yourself on track with where you are in the story and what it is that you're actually enjoying about the book. It has a little bit of a domino effect, and you do get that little bit of dopamine as well. My next tip would be to read something familiar. Now, this is something that people often say, is to reread a book, reread something that was your favorite book. I would say that you could always go into reading graphic novels or manga or children's books or something that is easily accessible to you. And if it has the bonus feature of being nostalgic for you, well then go ahead and do that. It can be something that you read as a child that you want to re-experience as an adult. I did that a couple of years ago when I reread The Hobbit. That particular reading experience for me was wonderful, and I was kind of annoyed at myself that I had kept myself from doing it for such a long time, just because I was like, oh, I shouldn't bother rereading books because there's always so many more books to read that I've never read. You know, what's the point in going back and revisiting something that I already know what's going to happen at the end? Well, it turns out, joy. It doesn't always have to be a reread. It could be some subject that you're actually interested in. You can get out a non-fiction book or something along the lines of that. You can even get picture books, to be perfectly honest. Something that just keeps you engaged with it. My next tip would be to time your reading sessions. Now, this is something that I do, especially when I have something to do on that day. So, for example, if I have something to do at 4 o'clock in the day, from the time that I wake up to the time that I'm meant to do something, that time is completely wasted because I just can't relax until I get whatever it is that I need to do out of the way for the day. So when I set a timer on my phone for half an hour, what have you, I know that that specific time is my time. I know that there are no expectations of me. I know that no one's going to bother me. And sometimes, you know, I don't just set a timer on my phone. Sometimes I'll just pull up a YouTube video that's an hour long that has music or some sort of ambience that I can just relax and read to. And that has been like one of the best things that I've done, and I will still do it to this day on days that I am doing something later in the evening and I'm finding that my brain can't relax because I'm anxious about whatever it is that I need to do. I will do it when I feel like I am just a little bit distracted, or if I just specifically want to spend an hour of my day reading, I'll just time it so I know for a fact that I read from this time to this time. It makes the absolute world of difference when it comes to how much you're reading. Also, participating in online reading sprints, that's another great way to not only make sure that you're reading for a certain amount of time, but you're also able to engage within a bookish community. You're all doing the same thing, and it's a great way to motivate yourself, and it's just that way to reinforce what it is that you're trying to do and keep you on track with all that sort of thing. Another tip that I have to keep you motivated is that you may need to gamify your reading. Now, I don't mean that you have to make it super childish, that you have to do like a book scavenger hunt, or I feel like people are going to be like, there's nothing wrong with a book scavenger hunt, but you know, like you don't have to wrap your books up and then pick them at random and all this sorts of thing. It can be just as simple as making a reading tracker for yourself. So if you have a journal, or even if you have a calendar, you can make the decision to say, okay, in the month of September, I want to read every single day. And I'm not going to set any restrictions on that. If I read for 10 minutes on one day, that counts. So you can just cross off the days as you go. Gamifying your reading means that you are motivating yourself, and you have to remember that it's all about that motivation and keeping that love for reading and keeping that want to read there. You could also set a reading goal, even though sometimes those can be super frustrating by the time you get to the end of the year. So don't go overboard with it. Again, especially if you're someone who's been out of the habit for a really long time. If you just set a reading goal to 5 books, then that's your reading goal. Another thing that I've done to gamify my reading is that I've written down all my unread books and I have been ticking them off as I go through them. And that's something that keeps me really motivated because it's something that I keep finding myself wanting to go back to. And I'm like, okay, I want to get another book crossed off. So it means that I'm going to have to start it and finish it. If I'm not feeling super motivated, reminding myself of that or reminding myself of my daily reading tracker is something that will make me say, okay, I'm going to set aside the time now to get this reading done because these are the goals that I have for the year. This is what I want. And I'm not going to distract myself and I'm not going to hold myself back from doing what I want. Another tip for people who are specifically getting back into reading is that you may find you need to swap up your genres. A lot of the time, the stuff that we read as teenagers isn't going to be something that resonates with us as adults. And, you know, a lot of the time you hear people say like, oh, I haven't read a book since high school, or I haven't read a book since college, and they just want to get back into it. Swapping out your genres could be something that's really useful to you because, you know, as we get older, our tastes change. Sometimes you get lucky and your taste can kind of stay the same. But even when it comes to me, when it comes to reading horror, which is one of my all-time favorite genres, I find that I don't want to be reaching for like extreme horror. I don't want to be reaching for something that has a whole heap of gore because even though that may have appealed to me when I was younger because I thought it was cool, as I get older and I start to think about my mortality a bit more and I have a bit more respect for it than I did when I was younger, I find that there's certain subgenres of horror that I just don't really want to read anymore. And that's just part of growing up. And that's just something I have to accept. And that is something that I found super frustrating. I hate that I'm getting a bit more sensitive as I get older. It has been something that has been driving me mad. And I will sometimes force myself to read something that's like super gory and explicit. And then I'm like, I don't want to pick up this book because it's not something that I actually want to be reading. Therefore, I become resentful of the act of reading. So again, testing out different genres, testing out books that are shorter. You know, you don't want to go into it like being like, I'm going to read War and Peace after not reading books in years. You know, that is not a productive way to go into it. You can. Best of luck to you. Trying to find your taste now is something that's really important. And once you do find the books that you want to be reading, you will find that the act of reading is a lot easier to do because you're reading stuff that you actually want to be reading. My next tip is that if you want to stay motivated or if you want to get motivated to read, indulge yourself in some online content. There are certain content creators who do an absolutely wonderful job at sharing their love of reading. And because they're so invested and in love with their reading, it really does help you feel inspired to pick up something because you're like, I want to feel that. I haven't felt that way about a book in years. You know, I want to feel absolutely captivated by a book that when I'm not reading, I just want to go back to and I'm thinking about how it's going to end. I feel for myself, there's only like a handful of creators that really are able to make me feel that way. I will say flat out right now that if I'm watching someone who's doing a reading wrap up and they come on with an attitude like, oh, I only read 16 books this month. I had a really bad reading month. I'm like, okay, great. Because I only read 2 books. So if you only read that amount of books and you hate yourself, how do you think I feel? You know, it can have the complete opposite effect. But I consume a lot of book talk, bookstagram, booktube, not as much as I used to, but it's still there for certain content creators. And especially when it comes to reading vlogs and people reading books that they're excited to read, you know, their most anticipated book of the year, watching people who are so genuinely in love with what they're reading, they're so genuinely in love with the hobby that it's just catching. And those are the people you want to be watching. Also, to just tag on to that last point is that there is an abundance of content creators who have created videos specifically on books to help you get out of a reading slump. But there are many different creators with many different genre interests, and you can pretty much find a video based on the genre that you're specifically interested in reading. and find some books that you're just going to be able to binge through based on people's recommendations. So if you're having trouble on finding books that you actually want to read, or you want to know that it's something that can be binge read, all you have to search is the term books to get you out of a reading slump, and you will be met with hundreds of different recommendations, and there's something for everyone in there. My next tip is that if you have books on your bookshelf that you've had for months, for years, you've had them for so long that you can't even remember what it is that made you want to read them in the first place, you don't always have to read them. And by that, I'm not saying just unhaul the books you haven't read. I'm kind of anti that. If you're someone who is finding that like you're just super uninspired by the books that you have at home, use the library. Get back to the library. You don't always have to go down to the library physically. You can also use their online access to audiobooks, to ebooks. There are so many great resources out there now for people who want to read, who want to use their library. I find that the libraries in Ireland have really gone above and beyond. Like, you can even get magazines and newspapers and all that sort of stuff online for free. Using the library is one of the best things that you can do to get yourself inspired, because not only if you do go to it, you can browse for hours, you can take out books that you wouldn't normally buy, you can test them out, you can test what genres it is that you like. You can get a whole heap of graphic novels out. I feel like it's a resource that we don't mention enough, especially when it comes to YouTube book content creators. I feel like there is a huge push on consumption and on buying and on having a book collection and stuff, but like, sometimes all you need is a library card. I also find that when it comes to reading library books, I read them at a much faster pace than I would my own book, because I think it might just be a mixture of the fact that I know that it has to go back to the library at a certain point. There might even be a reserve on whatever book that it is that I'm reading, but also I can just open it and read. You know, I'm not worrying about keeping the book in immaculate condition, because I can also be a bit finicky like that too. But when it comes to reading library books, there's honestly no greater joy than just being able to browse, being able to go online and look if your library has certain books, being able to order books in from other libraries. It's just an absolute wonderful service. And if you have the ability to access your local library, do it. Do it. Regardless if you have bought a whole heap of books, I don't care. You should be reading library books. You should be supporting your local library if you have the opportunity to do so. So those have been all my tips and tricks on how to get out of a reading slump. As always, if I've missed anything, feel free to comment below and let me know any tips that you have found useful for getting out of a reading slump, because not only will it be beneficial to others reading through the comments, it's going to be beneficial to me during my next reading slump. So if you want to follow me outside of YouTube and keep up with what I'm reading, you can always follow me on my Instagram or my TikTok. Again, a big thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring the video, and always, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you found it useful, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.